The ache in my lower back had become a constant, throbbing companion. It was a souvenir from a minor car accident 6 months prior, a stubborn reminder of whiplash that refused to fully release its grip. I'd tried physical therapy, heating pads, and even those awkward ergonomic chairs, but the deep-seated tension remained, a knot of pain that tightened with stress and long hours spent at my graphic design desk. That's when my husband, Mark, suggested it. Mark was a good man, a solid, reliable software engineer with kind eyes and steady hands. He wasn't overly demonstrative, but his love language was acts of service. He'd fix my laptop, change the oil in my car, and make me a cup of tea without being asked. "Chloe," he said one evening, watching me wince as I shifted on the couch. "Let me try. I've been watching some videos on therapeutic massage. For the lower back, I can't stand seeing you in pain like this." I was hesitant. My body had felt like a fragile thing since the accident, and the idea of anyone, even Mark, applying pressure to that specific area made me flinch. But his expression was so earnest, so filled with genuine concern, that I relented. "Okay," I said, a small, grateful smile touching my lips. "Just be gentle. I will be, I promise." We decided to do it in the living room, where the light was soft and the familiar surroundings felt safe. I lay face down on the thick, wool rug we'd bought on a trip to Santa Fe, a pillow tucked under my chest to elevate my upper body slightly. The fireplace was off, but the room was warm, filled with the golden glow of the late afternoon sun filtering through the bay window. Mark knelt beside me. I heard the soft squirt of lavender-scented massage oil into his palms, the gentle rub of his hands together to warm it. The scent filled the air, a familiar and calming aroma. "Just try to relax, honey," he murmured, his voice a low, soothing rumble. His hands, when they first made contact, were warm and surprisingly confident. He started with broad, slow strokes across my entire back, spreading the oil, warming up the muscles. I let out a long, slow breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The tension in my shoulders began to ease. For the first time in weeks, my body started to unclench. "That feels amazing," I mumbled into the pillow, my voice muffled. "Good," he said softly. His touch was respectful, methodical. He worked his way down, paying attention to the tightrope of muscles along my spine. He was following a pattern, I could tell, perhaps something he'd genuinely learned from a video. He used his thumbs to circle the knots in my scapulae, and I groaned in a mixture of pain and relief. This was my husband, the man I'd shared a life with for 8 years. The man who knew I hated mushrooms on my pizza and that I cried at every single dog food commercial. He was my safe harbor. As his hands worked, my mind drifted. I thought about our wedding day, a small, sun-drenched affair in a friend's backyard. I thought about the way he'd held my hand during both of my difficult labors with our children, who were now 5 and 7 and sleeping soundly upstairs. This intimacy, his hands on my skin, felt like an extension of all those years of shared life, of building a family, of weathering storms together. He gradually moved his focus to the epicenter of my pain, my lower back. His touch became more specific, more deliberate. He used the heels of his palms to apply firm, steady pressure on either side of my spine. It was intense, walking that fine line between therapeutic pain and pure agony, but it was working. The stubborn knot was beginning to yield. I was so lost in this sensation, in the trust and the relief, that I almost didn't register the subtle shift at first. His rhythm changed. The firm, therapeutic pressure of his palms softened, and his touch became different. It was lighter, almost exploratory. His fingers, which had been working in strong, deliberate circles, now seemed to be tracing the waistband of my yoga pants, not with the intention of moving them, but with a strange, lingering caress. A tiny, cold pinprick of unease touched the base of my spine, a sensation entirely separate from the physical pain. I dismissed it. "You're being paranoid, Chloe. He's just adjusting his technique." But then it happened again. His left hand remained on my back, applying pressure, but his right hand drifted. It wasn't a therapeutic drift. It moved lower, down to the very top of my glutes, and his fingers pressed in a way that wasn't about loosening a muscle. It was a slow, intimate squeeze. The kind of touch that belonged in the bedroom, not in a therapeutic context on the living room floor. My body went rigid. The relaxation I'd felt evaporated, replaced by a sudden, icy alertness. Every nerve ending was on fire. This was wrong. This felt foreign. "Mark," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. "Shish, just relax," he whispered, but his voice sounded different. It was lower, huskier. It wasn't the voice of my concerned husband. It was a voice laced with an intimacy that felt completely misplaced in this moment. His right hand began to move again, and this time, there was no mistaking it. It was a deliberate, sensual caress, his fingers splaying possessively over a part of my body that was, in this context of a pain relief massage, entirely off limits. The trust that had cocooned me just moments before shattered into a million jagged pieces. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misguided attempt at therapy. This was something else. A wave of nausea washed over me, mixed with a profound sense of violation. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of panic. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he's just trying to be romantic. Maybe the mood shifted for him. But no, the context was everything. I was vulnerable, in pain, and had explicitly consented to a medical massage. This was a breach of that consent, a fundamental crossing of a line I hadn't even known needed to be drawn with my own husband. I couldn't lie there another second. I twisted away from him, scrambling up into a sitting position, my back screaming in protest at the sudden movement. I pulled my knees to my chest, wrapping my arms around them, creating a physical barrier between us. "What are you doing?" I demanded, my voice trembling. Mark looked startled, his hands still hovering in the air where my body had been. His face was a confusing mask of confusion and something else, a flicker of guilt, perhaps, or frustration. "What? I was just massaging your back," he said, his tone defensive. "No, you weren't," I shot back, my cheeks burning with a mixture of anger and humiliation. "That wasn't a massage, Mark. Not at the end." "What was that?" He dropped his hands, his expression hardening. "I don't know what you're talking about, Chloe. You're being oversensitive. I was trying to help you, and you're twisting it into something weird." Oversensitive, twisting it. The words were like daggers. They were the classic tools of gaslighting, making me question my own perception of reality. But I knew what I had felt. The memory of his touch was seared into my skin, a brand of betrayal. "I know what I felt," I said, my voice low and shaky but firm. "I consented to a back massage to help with my pain. You crossed a line." He stood up, his posture stiff. "Fine, if you're going to be like that, I won't try to help you again." He turned and walked out of the room, leaving me sitting on the floor, surrounded by the faint, cloying scent of lavender oil that now smelled suffocating. The rest of the night passed in a cold, silent blur. We moved around each other in the house like ghosts, the comfortable silence we often shared now thick and heavy with unspoken accusations and hurt. I couldn't look at him. Every time I did, I saw the man I loved, but superimposed over him was the man with the unfamiliar, possessive touch. The cognitive dissonance was dizzying. I went to bed early, claiming a headache, which wasn't a lie. My mind was pounding. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, replaying the incident over and over. The initial comfort, the growing unease, the final, shocking violation. Why was I reacting so strongly? It was just a touch. We were married. We'd been intimate thousands of times. But that was the point. Intimacy was built on mutual desire and context. This was different. This was a violation of a specific, vulnerable trust. It felt predatory. It felt like he saw an opportunity in my pain, and that realization made my skin crawl. The next few days were a masterclass in strained civility. We talked about the kids, about bills, about what to have for dinner, but the real conversation hung in the air between us, a toxic cloud we both pretended not to see. My back pain was worse than ever, a physical manifestation of the emotional knot that had tightened inside me. A week later, the dam finally broke. It was a Saturday morning. The kids were at a birthday party, and the house was unnervingly quiet. Mark was at his desk in the corner of the living room, paying bills on his laptop. I was folding laundry on the sofa, the silence stretching between us like a taut rubber band ready to snap. My phone, sitting on the arm of the couch, buzzed with a notification. It was from Mark, a shared calendar reminder for our daughter's dentist appointment. Without thinking, I reached over and tapped the screen to open the calendar and confirm the time. That's when I saw it. As the calendar app opened, it briefly displayed the last used app on his phone, which he must have used to set the reminder. It was a messaging app I didn't recognize, one that wasn't the standard iMessage or WhatsApp we used. The screen was only visible for a second, but it was long enough. Long enough to see a contact name at the top of the screen, Jake. Jake was Mark's old college friend. They'd been close once but had drifted apart after Jake moved to Seattle a few years ago. We hadn't seen him in person since. Why would Mark be using a separate, secretive app to message him? A cold dread, entirely different from the shock of the massage, began to pool in my stomach. This was unrelated, I told myself. It was probably nothing, but the seed of suspicion, planted during the massage incident, had taken root and was now sprouting dark, tangled vines. I waited until Mark went to the kitchen to get a drink. My heart was a wild bird in my chest. This was a violation of his privacy, I knew. But the feeling of violation I still carried from the living room rug gave me a desperate, reckless courage. I picked up his laptop. It was password protected, but I knew the password. He'd given it to me years ago so I could help him find a file. My fingers trembled as I typed it in. The desktop bloomed to life. I felt like a thief in my own home. I opened the browser, my mind racing. What was I even looking for? I went to the history. It was mostly tech forums, sports news, and work-related sites. Then I saw it, a series of entries from the night before the massage. They were all from a website with a nondescript, clinical-sounding name, something like, Therapeutic Techniques Online. I clicked on the link. The page that loaded wasn't about physical therapy. It was a forum, a very specific, very disturbing kind of forum. The banner at the top read, The Power Dynamic, Exploring Control and Surrender. My blood ran cold. I started scrolling. The posts were from men, mostly, talking about techniques to establish dominance over their partners. They discussed manipulation, psychological games, and yes, they discussed using moments of vulnerability, like when a partner was sick, or tired, or in pain, to assert control and initiate sexual contact under the guise of care. They shared tips on how to make it seem like an accident, how to gaslight their partners if they protested, just as Mark had done to me. One post, in particular, made my stomach heave. A user with the screen name, architect_33, Mark was an architect in college before switching to software, wrote, "My wife has chronic back pain. It's the perfect setup. She asks for a massage, and I have a green light to push boundaries. The key is to start clinical, then shift subtly. If she calls you on it, deny it. Tell her she's misinterpreting your caring touch. It works every time. It's about reclaiming the power dynamic." The words swam before my eyes. Reclaiming the power dynamic. My mind flashed back to the months leading up to the massage. I'd been more successful in my freelance work, landing a couple of big clients. We'd joked about me being the breadwinner for a while. Had that bothered him more than he let on? Had my pain and vulnerability presented an opportunity for him to, as the post said, reclaim the power? I felt the room tilt. This wasn't just a misguided, clumsy pass. This was calculated. This was a conscious, premeditated act of psychological manipulation, learned from a community of like-minded men online. The massage wasn't an act of love or care, it was an exercise in dominance. A performance. I heard his footsteps returning from the kitchen. I quickly closed the browser, set the laptop down exactly as I'd found it, and picked up a tiny pair of jeans, pretending to fold them with intense concentration. He sat back down at his desk, humming softly. He had no idea that the foundation of our entire life together had just crumbled to dust around me. The shock was so profound it was almost physical. It was a seismic shock, rearranging the entire landscape of my past, present, and future. The man I had shared a bed with, had children with, had built a life with, was a stranger. The memory of his touch on my back now felt filthy, contaminated by the vile ideology I had just read. I had to get out of the room. I mumbled something about needing air and walked out the front door, my legs feeling like rubber. I stood on the porch, the bright, normal sunshine feeling like an insult. I wrapped my arms around myself, but I couldn't stop shaking. What was I supposed to do? Confront him? He would just deny it, delete the evidence, and call me crazy. Go to a therapist? Maybe. But first, I needed proof. I needed to understand the depth of this. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a detective in my own home, a role that filled me with self-loathing but felt necessary for survival. I was careful, methodical. I discovered he used a private browsing window for his visits to that forum, but he'd gotten sloppy with his phone. When he was in the shower, I would quickly check the unfamiliar messaging app. The conversations with Jake weren't with his old friend at all. Jake was a username for a moderator of the forum. Their chats were filled with links to posts and discussions of techniques. They talked about women as objects, as puzzles to be solved for their own gratification. The person in those messages was not Mark. My Mark was kind, if a little reserved. This person was cold, calculating, and saw intimacy as a battlefield. The man who lovingly packed our kids' lunches was the same man who wrote online about the thrill of the covert escalation. The final piece of the horrifying puzzle fell into place when I found a hidden folder on his laptop, buried deep within system files. It was filled with saved posts and PDFs. One was a lengthy document titled, The Caregiver Protocol. It detailed, step by step, how to use a partner's illness or injury to create a dependency, to break down their resistance, and to introduce sexual acts under the pretext of treatment. It explicitly advised to always maintain plausible deniability, and to use their pain as your gateway. I felt sick. My car accident, my 6 months of suffering, had he seen it as an opportunity? The thought was so monstrous I could barely breathe. I knew I couldn't stay. The shock had subsided, replaced by a cold, clear-eyed certainty. This was abuse. It was psychological and emotional abuse, and it was founded on a complete lack of respect for my autonomy and my body. The man I loved was a carefully constructed facade. The confrontation was the hardest thing I have ever done. I didn't do it in the heat of anger. I planned it. I waited until the kids were at a sleepover. I had printed out some of the most damning evidence, the architect_33 post, snippets of his chat with Jake, the title page of The Caregiver Protocol. I laid them out on the kitchen table. When he came home, I was sitting there, waiting. The house was silent. "What's all this?" he asked, his smile fading as he saw my expression. "Sit down, Mark," I said. My voice didn't shake. He sat. I watched his face as he looked at the papers. I saw the color drain from it. I saw the panic, the fear, and then the mask of anger slam down. "You went through my computer," he snarled. "That's what you're going to focus on," I said, my tone icy. "Not the fact that you've been participating in a hate group that teaches men how to sexually manipulate their partners. Not the fact that you used my pain, the worst physical experience of my life, as a gateway." I spat the word. He was silent for a long moment, his jaw working. The denial I expected never came. Instead, he just looked at me, and for a fleeting second, I saw the real him, not my husband, not the kind software engineer, but architect_33, exposed and cornered. "It's not what you think," he said, but the words were hollow, devoid of conviction. "It's exactly what I think," I replied. "I want you to leave. Now. We can discuss the details through lawyers." He moved out that night. The divorce proceedings were ugly and complex, centered largely on the safety and well-being of our children. My lawyer was a fierce woman who helped me use the evidence I'd gathered to secure full custody with supervised visitation for him, a stipulation I fought for relentlessly. I couldn't risk him applying his protocols on our children. The healing process has been long and is ongoing. The physical pain in my back eventually faded with the help of a new, highly recommended physical therapist, a woman. But the emotional scar is deeper. It's a fundamental betrayal of trust that has changed how I see the world. I'm more cautious now. I listen to my gut. If a situation feels wrong, I no longer dismiss it as paranoia. I share this story not for sympathy, but as a warning. The most dangerous betrayals don't always come from strangers in dark alleys. Sometimes, they come from the person you trust most, in the safety of your own home, under the gentle glow of the living room lamp. They can begin with a loving offer, a warm touch, a scent of lavender. And the thing that shocks you to your core isn't always a single, violent act. Sometimes, it's the slow, horrifying realization that the person massaging your back, the person you call your partner, has been following a secret script you never agreed to, seeing your vulnerability not as something to soothe, but as something to exploit. The greatest shock was discovering that the man I loved was a carefully crafted illusion, and the truth was far more terrifying than I could have ever imagined.